I want to stay in the event room. I'm always going to pick stay as opposed to search if I have an option, which almost always turn into a bad ending, but I'm sticking with it. Stay. I didn't move from where I was. I only wanted to finally get out. However, when Sai had revealed the time, uncertainty had began to creep in. It was 8 o'clock. The ridiculous day was coming to an end, but there was still something we were missing. The truth. We knew nothing about what had happened. Even though many of the strange things that had occurred felt at least theoretically possible to understand, when I tried to think about them, I couldn't. Maybe the problem was that I couldn't be sure if I was right about anything, but technically, I thought, there was proof that untangling the day's events was possible. The existence of the Atsuki we'd talked to was inexplicable, but the fact that he'd known what would happen and told us of a certain outcome proved that the truth was attainable. Despite that, as the seconds kept ticking, the answers I tried to reach changed more and more. What would happen to me? I looked up to try to believe that nothing would, but I had no way to know. At that moment, many people had been on the other side of the shutter, and my parents must have been present among them. It was a given that we would be thoroughly questioned by the police, and that an extensive investigation was to come. And lastly, by an enigmatic version of Atsuki, we'd been assured that she would somehow come back. It didn't make any sense, but I'd started to care less and less about that. She was alive, and it didn't seem like the fact that she had died twice mattered much. She would come back and maybe bring an explanation with her. I never wished her any harm, but after her death I'd realised that her absence was simply better. I didn't want her back. What? That's fucked. Just as I've been fond of Atsuki since years in the past, I never liked her constant presence. The me from 2 weeks earlier had shrugged off her disappearance, and the me stuck in the tower couldn't even care about her imminent return. It was all tiresome. Coming to the exhibit had ironically worked to bring her back, and it might have been for the better, even though Atsuki had offered for me to stay with him temporarily. I'd never been sure he would have recovered without going to live with his parents. We had to accept that we were leaving many questions behind, but there were plenty more in the outside world. Perhaps it wasn't a bad idea to consider finding a job somewhere else if I had the chance. I'd recently learned how much I despised acting differently than I felt, which was bound to persist if I didn't. What's the time? It's 8:33. Atsuki, you wouldn't by chance be telling the truth, would you? I was. Arcado, do you remember Editor? Do you think she still had all her buttons? Oh, I didn't notice. Me neither, I didn't consider it. I think she might have had all of them though. I didn't lie about anything. If that's true, maybe we really should do what you proposed and go search again. You think so? Isn't it too late for that? It's unlikely anything will happen if we just stay here. I suppose. When I looked at the rest, I noticed that I wasn't the only person feeling nervous. All of them had their own worries and doubts about what was coming. Was it freedom that awaited? What would the world do when it found out about the Sekimeiya's powers? The answers were approaching. Those last 20 minutes were holding the shutter in place. I was good at calming myself down, and that was all I could do. The only movement in the room came from Atsuki bouncing his leg. I closed my eyes, waiting to leave the smoke-stained walls behind as soon as possible. What was that? It's coming from the lobby. 5 minutes later, we'd heard a rough sound. Upon stepping into hallway A, it became clear the lobby was the source. Wait, isn't that... We walked to the door and opened it. What? It hasn't been 12 hours yet. The shutter was withdrawing. The friction produced the sound we'd heard. Nothing mattered anymore. The faint light of the night had begun to cross the smooth glass of the exit door. What? Naomi? What's happening? It's already time. Come on, Isla. What? Perplexed, we stared at Naomi, who slowly raised herself off the floor. She seemed to be in pain, with a strong headache. As soon as we saw the blood below her, she understood it was hers, and gasped. Oh, you're okay. The shutter slid all the way. Behind the door, one of multiple dark silhouettes placed its hand on the handle. But before it opened, Naomi looked at all of us, her eyes driving stakes into our bodies. She opened her mouth and her words were mixed with the sound of our freedom. You're a murderer. And you're behind this attack. Who are you pointing at? Quick, tell me. Son of a bitch. We're not going to find out, are we? The moonlight glanced off the floor of the lobby. 8 pairs of eyes saw the outside world unveiled to them again as the door they'd entered through had reopened. At that instant, nothing else mattered. The icy air they longed for was in reach. It was time for Ashiya Tower to be exposed. After that long day, the final result, the world's truth, had been decided. Many policemen rushed inside the vast lobby. They saw a group of people next to a door. But there was a more pressing matter. Lying on the floor was a man wearing their own uniform. The juxtaposition of life and death signified the end of the Sekimeiya play. For one side, it was time to gather questions, and for the other, it was time to let them go. Everyone was taken outside, where they saw the stars had always been above them. But it was soon understood that the events of the day had uncountable mysteries. The entire building was raided and nobody else was found. The Sekimeiya, believed to be the target of the attack, hadn't been taken. A secret door existed in the storeroom, which they were sure the deceased policeman had gone through. However, it was locked. To most of the 8 witnesses, that was of no consequence. They had no choice but to value their freedom, and they didn't hold the keys to enough questions. Safely escaping a killer's reach had to be enough for them. Monetary compensation was given to some due to Ashiya's reckless security measures. Others were held accountable for potential crimes such as murder and theft. None of those 8 would ever have the chance to fully learn what had happened that day in the tower, but they were aware of the Sekimeiya's powers. However, only 2 people spoke of them. Naturally, their statements were ridiculed and interpreted as laughable, a laughable coordinated attempt at cover. In the distant future, the Sekimeiya would return to the tower. Against the unbelievable claims of the guilty parties, no visitor's touch would allow a travel through time. From then onward, the Sekimeiya would stay in the special cabinet, symbolising Shin's failure. There was a lingering question within two of the survivors, one isolated from the simple curiosity of the outside world. It entailed the veracity of some words they'd heard. Everything should turn out fine. Almost 4 days had passed, but it didn't feel that long. It felt to them as if that promise had been made mere hours ago. Had it already turned out to be false? It was impossible to know. Had those words truly been said? That too was impossible to know. Then they learned. They understood that they had been aided. Who had it been? A divine presence? There was nobody to thank, so their gratefulness didn't reach anyone. But they knew that that entity existed, and that it had made possible the bright future ahead. Atsuki's phone rang. On the screen, he saw a name he thought he'd never read again. He picked up quickly as possible, and then heard a voice he thought he'd never hear again. Atsuki? What the hell happened to me? It's Shiroya, right? I guess, Mia's... Man, I was so shocked by Mia saying, oh no, I didn't want her to come back. Fuck her. That was brutal, man. What the hell? And Shiroya was so cut up about Mia's death, but the opposite is not true. Okay, that wasn't really a bad ending. That was an ending. Forbidden fruit. A handful of police cars had gathered at the entrance of Ashiya Tower, ensuring complete isolation of the inside. That had gone on for hours, and Yushibana's citizens hadn't stopped extending the crowd behind the authorities. 13 police officers stood in front of them like sentinels. A thick layer of metal had been covering the door of the building all day, and it had been many hours since communication with the inside had suddenly cut off. Next to the blocked entrance stood the people in charge of the operation. Curator was told the time. In less than 20 minutes, the blockade would open. They had prepared for all possible outcomes. Curator had been there since the previous night, withstanding the constant noise of the curious and alarmed citizens, and trying to converse with the stubborn Ashiya representative that had shown up in the morning. After breathing deeply, he approached one of the police cars. Kano, have you seen the Vice today recently? Seen Vice today? The policeman under Curator's orders frowned, realizing that he hadn't actually seen Vice today in hours. Oh, I haven't. Did something happen to him? He was in his car earlier, but I haven't managed to get in touch with him since. I saw he wasn't waiting in the car, and he didn't pick up when I tried to call him. He's the one that got killed in the lobby. Kano looked through his left window toward the car Vice today had been in. It was next to the tower's entrance, as he'd been told. Nobody could see through its open windows. I apologize, but I don't know what he went to do. I haven't spoken to him all day. Sudipo walked away slowly, a little concerned. Days prior, Vaisade had been insistent in saying that an attack would occur in the morning of the 15th. However, he also kept saying that it was a hunch, and he didn't have proof of it. Furthermore, after their talk, Vaisade had told Sudipo that he wouldn't come to work again. He wasn't directly under Sudipo's command, but he knew Sudipo had been in charge of Ashiya and Shin's confrontation, and that he knew about its details more than his actual boss. In the morning of the 15th, 2 more police teams had been sent to Ashiya Tower to take control of the situation after the attack. At that time, Sudipo had seen Vaisade and the team he'd always been part of. Sudipo knew that he might have had valuable information, having correctly foreseen the attack. However, in the past, he hadn't provided any, so Sudipo hadn't prioritized going to question him. Later on, when he'd looked, he'd been unable to find Vaisade. After talking to his colleagues, they all claimed not to know his whereabouts either. Sudipo was indecisive. If Vaisade had known about Shin's attack, why had he only warned them that it would occur? He hadn't accomplished anything, as it had already been a well-known possibility. And even if he'd been involved with Shin in some way, the same question had to be asked. His disappearance was suspicious. Had he gone off to act as a part of their plot? Or had something happened to him? At no point had he told anyone about it, and nobody had seen him leave. Confident that those questions would be answered in the future, Sudipo walked back to the shutter to continue waiting for 9:04 when the entrance would open. Near the back of the crowd, standing off by herself, was a lone woman in a heavy coat. She repeatedly twisted a lock of her hair in one hand, murmuring quietly to herself as the police nearby continued their own louder musings. The smell around here. Wonder what's causing it. You can barely tell it's there, but it's persistent. Is it related? The conversation nearby turned to the topic of Shin and their potential involvement. She went quiet, listening intently for any clues, but it was all information she'd heard within the past few minutes, regurgitated once again. Her left foot tapped an unconscious rhythm on the ground. She wasn't sure how she'd gotten involved in the events around the tower, but once she'd realised something unnatural was occurring, she couldn't ignore it. Curiosity drove her to appear outside, in spite of the persistent crowd of bored townspeople. Sudipo turned back, surveying the crowd once more. In the darkness, her blonde hair and slight fidgeting stood out. His caution getting the better of him, he decided to approach, as she wasn't a resident of the town that he'd ever seen before. Excuse me, would you be able to answer a couple of questions for me? Hello? Do you mean me, babe? Maybe. Yeah. How long you been here? Oh, only a little while, maybe an hour. I was curious about the tower. What's happening inside? Like everyone else here is, of course. A thin film of sweat formed on her forehead. It wasn't the first time she'd been questioned by a police officer. Being singled out had still made her nervous. Within her coat, she rubbed her arms. And your name? Oh, it's Larles. Just Larles is fine. I know it sounds odd, but it's normal where I'm from. I promise. Sudipo couldn't place her accent. It had a particular sound to it that he'd never heard before. Not even for any kind of show or songs. Would you happen to have any form of identification on you? Trembling like a leaf in the chilly winter breeze, Larles withdrew an object from her interior coat pocket and tapped it a few times. She opened and presented it to Sudipo, but her hand shook so thoroughly he couldn't read it. Gently removing it from her grip, he took a closer look and flipped through it. A passport, completely valid as far as he could tell, with nothing remotely questionable about it. Her name matched what she claimed. Nodding slightly, Sudipo handed it back to her. Instead of stowing it back in her pocket, Larles began to tap a constant beat on it, trying to calm her nerves. Did you just move here? I'm here on business, official business. Well, the tower was big news and it reminded me of one back where I'm from. That and it seemed strange. Strange how? Well, everyone's talking about it, right? How strange it is for people to be trapped inside. I'm only in town for a little while. I can leave if you think I'm suspicious. Sudipo arched an eyebrow. She was certainly suspicious, but not in the way a Shin plant would be. She was too obvious, and clearly harmless in his eyes. It's the most confusing thing I've ever seen. Why can't it be opened? I've been here a few times now, and nothing seemed out of place. But today, there's a big event and no explaining it. Do the police know anything? Everyone around here is clueless like me. I can't get into what we know and don't know in detail. I'm sure you understand. Of course, yes, but don't you think there has to be some kind of supernatural component? Like, maybe everyone inside time traveled, and now they're in the past, at a time when nobody else is inside. Do we even know they're still in there? There's no way to see inside, right? Sudipo blinked in disbelief. She claimed to be in Yushibana on some kind of business, but he didn't believe that. Her bringing up an outlandish topic like time travel most likely meant that she was some kind of magazine or news company and trying to bait readers. Where'd you get this idea from? It was someone in the crowd who mentioned it, and I thought it made a lot of sense. Still wary, she gestured indiscriminately at the people around the building. They'd formed small, isolated bubbles in places, continuing to increase in volume as the time approached. I see. Have you noticed anyone around here doing anything questionable? Or what about them disappearing? It was Sudipo's subtle way of discerning if she'd seen Vicide recently. He was still concerned about his location. No, sir, sorry to say. If I'd seen anything out of place, I would have told all of you immediately. Promise. I don't want to get in your way and all. I need to find the truth. At that moment, Lyles received a summons that she could not ignore. She'd known her time was short, but not that she wouldn't even be able to see the conclusion of the tower's mystery. Actually, I just got a call. I have to be going. Sorry, but would you mind if I took my leave? Sudipo sighed. She hadn't even pulled out a phone to check the call. He was no closer to an answer than he had been a few minutes ago, and he didn't expect such sudden excuses. Mentally, he made a note to check into her identity later, just in case his intuition was wrong, but she seemed unreliable at best. Well, thank you for your time. If you notice anything later on, please feel free to let us know. Sudipo returned to his position. Lyles fidgeted slightly, unsure that he had believed her. She didn't have any desire to confuse the locals, and desperately wanted to see the shutter open. It was too unique for her to ignore. But she was out of time. She couldn't afford to stay any longer. Sighing in resignation, she turned away from the building and began to walk. She had hoped that there was enough time to satisfy her curiosity, but it was inevitable. Lyles made a promise to herself. Whenever she got the opportunity, she would return and determine the truth of that day with her own eyes. She couldn't get into the tower normally, but with enough preparation it could be done. Resolving herself, she vanished into the night. Remember what I said. One of the people inside is a terrorist who will try something to steal the Sekimeiya. Any of the people here could be their comrade, and you must prioritize keeping their plan from succeeding. You can stop saying that. I'm well aware of what could be going on. Lei wasn't a blood relative of Ashiya, but she'd been sent as their representative, speaking on their behalf, and had been giving the police any essential information. From the get-go, she had stated that the process of stealing the Sekimeiya was underway despite Ashiya's public declarations, which were that Shin's plan had immediately failed. It was almost 9 o'clock, and the winter sky had long ago darkened, bringing a sheer cold to everyone who kept waiting to witness the resolution of a long day. This smell again, what the hell is it? Sudipo wasn't sure either. Throughout the whole day, they'd sporadically noticed a strange smell next to the tower. However, they hadn't been able to identify its source nor the smell itself. 9 o'clock came. The crowd was kept back by the group of policemen in front of the tower, but even the officials were partially curious how the shutter would withdraw. Speculation hadn't stopped. The widespread belief that everything was a part of Shin's plan and Ashiya had no way of stopping it. However, nobody could agree on how Shin would actually do it. Multiple groups of those with similar views formed the crowd outside the tower. On one side was the simply curious portion. On the other, the older citizens were eagerly awaiting Ashiya's defeat, voicing their harsh thoughts on the family. It had become known that the exit was going to remain closed for 12 hours, and although the police had kept quiet, something had seemingly caused disorder among them less than an hour after the attack. Additionally, the names of the trapped people had been released, but nobody had seen or heard of any of their relatives waiting outside for them. When the police stood up, everyone knew that the time had come, and the flash of some cameras started to illuminate the dark exterior of the tower. The last minutes were quiet. The police had been exchanging words, but they were too far from the crowd to be heard. Will this be enough people to apprehend everyone? We don't want something funny occurring. It's not a concern. Nobody will have a way to sneak anything out. There were only a few seconds left. Nobody knew the exact time the shutter had closed. They determined it to be right at about 9:04. Finally, letting out a loud and hoarse noise, the heavy shutter began rising until it fully disappeared from view. At the same time, some people in the crowd began to point up where the same thing was happening to the covered windows. The door wasn't blocked anymore, and the bright lobby could be seen through it. Immediately, policemen rushed in while Sudipo's expectations remained unmet. He'd been continuously told that someone would try to exit immediately with the Sekimeiya, and that they would need to be hastily detained. However, nobody could be seen inside. What the fuck is this? Before they could step into the tower, the team who'd rushed in was instantly taken aback, making brief eye contact with the confused multitude outside while covering their noses and grimacing. What's wrong? Something inside, it could be dangerous. Everyone who stayed next to the door understood immediately. After it had opened, it hadn't taken much time for the smell they'd been noticing to drastically intensify. That confirmed it had been coming from within the tower, something they'd previously discounted. 12 hours earlier, unidentified smoke had been released on the first floor of the tower. Right away, the possibility of it being poisonous had been presented. However, They'd abandoned it as soon as the safety of the trapped individuals had been confirmed less than an hour later. Nonetheless, they prepared equipment such as masks just to be careful. When they rushed to grab their equipment, the crowd began to show concern for the 8 people trapped, whose figures hadn't yet appeared. I knew it. Didn't I tell you they were planning something? You all better not let them get away with whatever they're trying to do. Everyone had dashed away from the entrance as soon as it had been perceived as dangerous. They could well have been an opening for someone inside to escape, but no such thing occurred. From a truck, the police took out protective suits alongside an optical gas imaging camera, as whatever had hit their noses had been invisible. The team ran back to the lobby and scanned the area with it. Look, there's definitely something inside. Everyone who looked at the image saw what appeared to be a very dense gas occupying the entire hall. It looked white in the image, and it seemed to be completely lack of source. The people in the back could see every movement, and they understood that the situation was being communicated through wireless devices. The gas was unidentified, but they'd all inhaled some of it. However, even if it was toxic, the masks and suits would work as a protection. Knowing that, the same team who tried to enter did so once again, hiding their faces behind the protective filters. Look for the Sekimeiya in the cabinet. If it's empty, finding the Sekimeiya is a priority. They had informed them of how the Sekimeiya looked and the necessity for cold temperature. Everyone who entered knew the Sekimeiya had to be immediately placed inside the cabinet, but after the precarious situation had been revealed, their focus was to secure everyone inside. Hey look! 5 people had entered. Before they could disperse through the building, one alerted the others and pointed at the floor. There, they saw dried blood. Not a single soul was in the lobby awaiting their escape. There was only blood. A foreboding emotion ate at the edges of the men who'd gone in first. While everyone else waited impatiently, those 5 officers began to scatter, opening every room and trying to uncover every unseen spot. They knew the layout of the building and had been given a way to enter every place that could be locked. One man confirmed that the mechanical room was barren and rushed back to enter hallway B, its walls nearly as dark. There, an old friend of his frantically tried to find the people who should have been trapped inside. A great deal of blood was on the floor toward the end of the hallway, which only compounded the officer's uneasiness. When he entered one of the crystal rooms on the right side, he saw the first person and stopped in place, turning around to confirm with the man behind him that what he was seeing was real. In the opposite hallway was a longer trail of blood. The security room was the first place to be opened, so they didn't have to wait long to have their fears confirmed. Then, in a deeper room, they saw an even more wretched nightmare. However, when one of the bathrooms were opened, any comprehension they had instantly shattered. They walked up the first staircase and saw a person standing there. It was a girl with blue hair who looked to be a bit disoriented. Everyone rushed to her and confirmed her safety. Instead of hammering her with questions, being under the impression that the gas could have been toxic, one of the men escorted her to the lobby, where she was hit by the air that she'd been longing for. The search continued, as more people were yet to be found. However, when the police reached the attic's door, there'd been no new discovery. One of them had been given their key after pressuring Ashiya. One of the highest levels of the tower was unlocked. They rushed inside. Less than half a minute was needed to understand that 3 people were missing. However, even though they hadn't found anyone in the attic, they had spotted something else they'd been searching for. The entrance had been closed again to prevent the gas from escaping, and every bystander had shifted further back and after being informed of the possible danger. Sudippo continued to wait for the arrival of his team, the only sound being the confused muttering of the crowd. At his side, Lei was visibly tense. One of their men appeared from hallway A with a girl who seemed to be in pain. "Are you okay?" Sudippo asked. The girl nodded faintly and looked away from him. "What's your name?" "Shiroya." "I see. I'm really sorry you had to go through this." But the other policeman glared at Sudippo, who didn't know what else was inside. Then he walked to a car with Shiroya, where the 8 people trapped inside were planned to be held. After 5 minutes of no development, a second policeman came back. Outside he took his mask off, and the look in his eyes was enough to convey what he'd seen. 4 of them are dead. Counting everyone, there should be 3 left. What? They were killed, but the others aren't anywhere inside. We haven't found the other 3 people who should be here. Are you fucking serious? What about the Sekimeiya? Don't worry about that. He explained that in the attic they'd found an egg-shaped white object that matched the Sekimeiya's description. Then, it had been brought to the cabinet downstairs as instructed. Then, they took it out. The plan definitely revolved around the Sekimeiya, but it failed. That has to be it. They looked relieved despite having been told about 4 casualties. However, Sudippo still hadn't understood his subordinate. How is it possible that the other 3 haven't been found? Are you sure you searched everywhere? Yes. Did you personally speak with all of them? I did. They all told me their names. They have to be inside. 2 more policemen came from the hallways and reported the same result. However, one of them inquired about something different. Is it possible they could have escaped? I saw a door in the storeroom I wasn't aware of. What the hell are you talking about? The man told them about the movable wall and about the door with the missing handle. Instead of entering to witness it by themselves, they walked to the left side of the building and estimated where the storeroom might have been. What the fuck is this? After just a minute of searching, a vague outline had been found resembling a door. Furthermore, although it was exceptionally well hidden, they saw a keyhole that meshed perfectly with the surface of the wall. There's no way this is a door. No such thing exists in the storeroom. Sudapo ignored her. It was obviously a door, however it didn't explain anything. Nobody could have escaped through here. Very soon after the attack occurred, people started watching from both sides, and not just the civilians gathered here, but also the police. Leigh was astonished, as no such door should have existed. However, even though she couldn't trust that nobody could have escaped, she wasn't that concerned. After all, the well-being of the Sekimeiya had been confirmed. In the worst-case scenario, the Shin members had fled. And given what I saw, nobody could have opened it from the inside. The handle's been removed, and there was no lock to pick. No, there's no way this leads inside the tower. It's impossible. It's impossible I wouldn't know about it. We could determine that easily. The keyhole looked old, and Sudapo believed that opening it without the key would be doable. If it was rusty or had been frozen, it could have been impossible. But it was in a decent state. It shouldn't take him very long. He instructed his subordinate to run to his car, where he had a standard lockpicking set. Once he received it, Sudapo began to fiddle with the lock, and quickly found that picking it was possible. This door is locked. We have to do this even if we had a handle. The other two looked at him, trying to suppress her and shivering. It wasn't from the cold alone. They'd learned that people had died, but also that some were missing. If the door led to a hidden room, the rest could have been inside. A major part of the crowd was occupied with looking at the entrance, so they didn't pay much attention to the people who'd gone to the left side of the building. After a few short minutes, the lock clicked and the door swung in. There's no fucking way. How did I not know about this? And how could Shin? The three of them saw the dark storeroom, with the wall that the other policeman had closed, hiding the hallway door from view. It was truly the storeroom. The peculiar smell started to become prominent once again, so they rushed back out and walked to the main entrance, wondering if the door had truly been used as a method of escape. It seemed it hadn't been possible to open from the inside, but the handle could have easily been removed by the people who hadn't escaped while the door had been open. Outside the front door, they saw the final man who'd entered the building. All of them confirmed the same story. 4 people had died, and there was nobody else alive. One of the victims, Naomi Kabka, had worked in the tower. However, 2 bodies that looked exactly like hers are inside. None of the people who got trapped share her last name, correct? Sudapo kept growing more confused and shook his head. 4 other people he'd talked to in the morning had died, which he still had trouble accepting. What the hell had happened in the tower? I took images of the inside. The gas is present practically around the entire building in different quantities, but I wasn't able to find a source for it. How is that possible? I also took pictures of the bodies. Sudapo remembered the voice of the child he'd heard at the start of that long day after looking at her face. The pictures also encompassed all the blood found in the hallways and elevator. 2 of the bodies had the same face and clothing, which was incredibly odd, as nothing like that had been mentioned during the brief period of communication with those inside. These bodies must be taken out. We don't know what happened or what the gas is, but it's in the entire building. A proper investigation might not be able to occur for a while with these circumstances. However, the security camera, having been recording since all this started, saved all the footage to a drive. The door had been closed again, but even then, they felt the smell was still present. They kept taking more steps back, while the orders to analyze the gas were being sent. Sudapo saw that one of his men was holding something. See, I thought this ending was only going to be like 2 more minutes past the half-hour mark, like the last one was. But now it's an hour long, so I'm going to be cutting this episode in half, just so you know. We'll do this in 2 parts. Apologies for that, because the last time we got to an end, I did the end. I didn't get to the end of the end, and I cut, and then I started a new episode, and we recorded for 2 minutes, and it ended properly. So I was just like, well, I don't want that to happen again, you know, I want the ending to be all-encompassing, but it's an hour long, so we'll be cutting it in half. You'll be seeing the second half right now. What's that? Oh, it's something I found on the first floor. Take a look at it. Sudapo reached out and grabbed a tiny piece of paper. He began to read the words written on it out loud. Hello, I'm sorry to have to write this. I still can't believe what happened. I haven't been able to stop crying, but I've always tried to tell myself that these things just occur. I know how selfish it is that I'm writing this, but I won't be able to live with myself if I don't. I need to say it. I've always wanted to, and I can't believe I never will. I love you. Everyone who heard Sudapo was bewildered, and then, when they understood that the events of the day contained innumerably more mysteries than they'd expected. As their only wish, they hoped that all the truth could be exposed. Unlikely, but whatever. Is that it? We need to go back to that choice and make a new decision, obviously. The sun had long ago set, letting the sheer cold prevail in the streets of Yushibana. Near the outskirts, the moon and a few light posts provided the only illumination. It was late and everyone around was preparing to end their day. Not one of them saw the figure of a young girl appearing by the entrance of a house below a stone roof. She found herself leaning against the cold wall and quickly looked down. Light snow was falling, but she was still able to discern some of the footprints she'd once left. Next to the wheel marks, she knew that she was seeing more. What she was seeing were the imprints of 3 different pairs of shoes. One trail was hers, and the other belonged to 2 of her friends. She traced them with her eyes and followed them to a door in the middle of the street. Next to it was a modest window with a curtain concealing the interior. Light was coming from the other side, but it was very faint. Without wasting time, she dashed to the door and opened it. She had appeared from the future. Instants earlier, she'd been inside Ashiya Tower on December 15th. It was 15 days before that time, so she knew what was soon to happen in the tiny store she'd hastily run to. At one point, her friend Atsuki had told her that it was possible to change the past. She firmly believed that she could make it happen herself. She pulled open the door, planning to diverge the world from the one she knew. Her field of vision was filled by lingering smoke. Knowing not to breathe in, she glanced down as the door closed behind her. There, she saw the first 2 people who'd fallen unconscious. They'd already escaped danger. She ran through the oppressive cloud and looked behind the stand of shelves. On the floor was her own body. She recalled the time she'd seen the smoke appearing and been unable to resist the loss of consciousness. She would be fine as well, so she stepped to the far side of the room. As she did so, she couldn't help but briefly breathe the polluted air. She was afraid it would knock her out, but instead, she noticed something. It was a smell from that day, and she knew what it was. Behind the prominent stenches of the smoke and artificial gas, there was a third hidden smell, present all around the shop. It was a possibility she'd already explored, so it didn't come as a surprise to her, but there was no time to think as she looked behind the last set of shelves. She saw the last person. Her friend Mia was unconscious on the floor, facing the ceiling. Just behind her was a powered-off heater, slightly emitting the deadly gas that had once ended her life. The range of the explosion would not be large, so saving her friend was doable, and she was confident she'd succeed. She kneeled and grabbed the shoulders of the unconscious girl, then she stepped back to drop her behind the shelves that would protect her. At that point she was saved, but she kept moving back, so the soon-to-break floor wouldn't swallow her. Once she was absent from all the danger, the girl stood up and looked at her past self. She didn't know the exact time, but her job hadn't ended yet. She stepped up to her own shoulders and grabbed them. After lifting herself, she began to back up. Then her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She turned around. She didn't see the door opening because a wooden shelf was blocking her sight, but soon after she heard the sound, the lights turned off. There was no time to react. During the instance before the light came back on, the girl closed her eyes and attempted to cover her face with her arms. Kaboom! The floor had shattered, and she found herself falling with the rubble, the deadly light shrinking within the familiar darkness. Shit, that was the right ending? Holy shit, I thought I got a bad ending. But we actually moved to chapter 3. Dude, that's even better. Oh man, okay, it wasn't an ending, it was just the end of a chapter. Ooh, that's even better. Holy crap. December 15th, 2011. We're going to wrap this one up here as soon as it stops moving on its own, you know. That's awesome. Chapter 2 is done. We did it in 2 pieces. I will chop it in half, like I said, because it's an hour long. And I need to get 3 episodes recorded every day, so I don't have an hour, you know. I can't do hour-long episodes. Even though we have done it before, I just don't have the time for that anymore, unfortunately. But that's awesome. We're on to chapter 3 now. So, each chapter ends at like an ending, like the end of the whole Ashiya Tower event happens, at the end of each chapter. Every chapter ends with the end of the event. And then the start again. And then the end again. And then it's like a loop. But it happens different every time. It's fascinating. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out for me, and I'll see you in the next one.